The registration clerk had been reaching for his stamp when his hand stopped. Not slowed, stopped. The particular involuntary arrest of a man whose eyes had just processed something that his training told him required an entirely different category of response than a stamp. Sylvan watched him read the document a second time, then a third. She had expected this. She had rehearsed this exact moment, the clerk's face, the pause, the recalibration, in the private hours of 6 years of careful living. The way you rehearse something you hope never arrives and cannot stop preparing for. Beside her, Mira stood with both feet planted and her amber eyes moving between the clerk and the document with the focused attention of a 6-year-old, who understood that adults around her were operating at a frequency as she had not yet been given full access to, but intended to monitor closely. The document was a birth record, the real one, the one Sylvan had written in the same hand that had written the false death record 6 years ago, because a forger's copy would have been defectable, and a forgery detected at the wrong moment would have been worse than no document at all. She had kept the real record in an oilskin sleeve behind the false back panel of her traveling chest for 6 years, move it whenever they moved, which had been 4 times in 6 years, which meant she had relocated this single piece of paper across 4 provinces with the same careful deliberateness she applied to Mira herself. The clerk's name was Drent. She knew this because she had been watching the registration table for 2 days before she approached it, identifying every variable, mapping every exit, confirming which official had the fastest reach to a weapon and which had the slowest. Drent had the fastest reach. His hand was moving toward it now. "This seal," he said carefully, "is the Royal Archive seal, the original Royal Archive seal, which means this document was generated in the Royal Archive," Sylvan said. "Yes." From the far end of the registry square, through the crowd of Drevith residents queuing in the morning light, she heard a door open, heard the specific quality of silence that a crowd produce when someone of significant authority moved through it. Voss. She recognized the atmospheric shift without needing to see him. She had spent 3 years in his proximity. She knew what his arrival felt like before she saw his face. "If you are new here, do not move. What this woman does in the next 4 minutes has been 6 years in the making. And the child standing beside her is about to change everything. Stay with me." Sylvan did not look towards the sound. She looked at Drent, at his hand, at the 3 inches between his fingers and the weapon at his belt. She had 1 move left. She had known this when she walked to the table. She had known it when she took the oilskin sleeve from the chest this morning and felt its weight for the last time as a secret. She placed her free hand flat on the document. She looked at Drent with the gray-blue eyes that had learned, across 6 years, of his necessary performance to communicate exact what she needed them to communicate, and nothing more. "Send for the king," she said quietly. "Before you do anything else, send for the king." She had not always been a woman who kept in oilskin sleeves behind false panel walls. Once, Sylvan Cale had been the most trusted person in the Sormere royals' household, not because she held rank, but because she held the thing that rank could not manufacture. The specific trust of people who had allowed her into the rooms where they were most vulnerable and had found her every time to be exactly what she appeared to be. The royal midwife. The woman who arrived before dawn and stayed until the crisis had resolved itself one way or the other. The woman who had seen every member of the inner court at their most unguarded and had never once used what she saw. That reputation had taken 8 years to build, had taken 1 night to spend. She did not regret the expenditure. She had known about the council's policy on female heirs for longer than she had known she was pregnant. It was not a written policy, nothing so accountable as writing. It was the kind of institution understanding that lived in the gaps between document decisions, in the specific language used when certain topics arose in certain rooms, in the way senior council members exchanged glances when the subject of succession contingencies came up, and the Alpha King was not present to observe the exchange. Sylvan had been present in those rooms in the capacity of staff. Undercourtesans, invisible in that useful, unranked women were invisible in courts that did not consider them worth forming in front of. She had watched. She had listened. She had filed the information with the methodical precision of a woman who understood that emotions people were the only currency available. The policy, as she had assembled across 2 years of careful observation, was this. Femme heirs who displayed dominant line gifts were assessed as succession liability rather than ascendant assets. The assessments had a standard outcome. The outcome was never documented. She had been 11 weeks pregnant when she confirmed what she already suspected. She had been 16 weeks pregnant when she felt the first resonance of command gift in the child she was carrying. A subtle, unmistakable warmth in the bond between them, the specific frequency of a gift that the Council's own historical records described as extinct. She had begun planning that night. The plan had required 3 things she possessed, and 1 she had to manufacture. She possessed the access as royal midwife. She had standing authorization to be in the birthing suite at any hour without prior notification. She possessed the knowledge. 6 years of attending royal and high-ranking births had given her a comprehensive understanding of every procedural requirement surrounding a royal birth, which meant she knew precisely which requirements could be satisfied with paperwork rather than witnesses. She possessed the seal, not the royal seal which was held by the council, but a legitimate royal archive seal that was used for birth. Documentation and which she had, over the preceding months, ensured was accessible to her through entirely routine professional channels. What she had to manufacture was solitude. She had managed the labor herf. This was the part she did not permit her to think about in detail on ordinary days, not because she could not manage it emotionally, but because the thinking served no function, and she had long since trained hers to reserve cognitive resource for variable that still required management. She had been thorough. She had been careful. She had delivered Myra in the pre-dawn hours of a winter morning with no witnesses, which she had ensured by the precise scheduling of every other staff member's duties for that 24-hour period. Myra had arrived in the world with her father's eyes and a silence that lasted approximately 4 seconds before she apparently decided that silence was insufficient for the occasion. Sylvan had written the false death record with hands that did not shake. This was important. She had needed them not to shake, and they had not shaken because she had made the decision weeks before, and the time for trembling was in the making of decisions, not the execution of them. She had been out of the capital before the morning bell. Dreveth was a provincial town at the southwestern edge of the Solmere territory, close enough to the border that Pack oversight was thin and far enough from the capital that no one who had known Sylvan in her previous life had reason to pass through. She had established herself as a midwife under her mother's family name, which was common enough in the southwest to invite no attention, and had built a practice over 6 years that gave her income, standing, and the legitimate reason to be present at unusual hours that her profession had always provided. She had built a life with the same disciplined intention she had applied to its predecessor, different materials, same architecture. Myra had grown up in it with the wholehearted confidence of a child who had never been given reason to doubt that she was loved safe, entirely allowed to be whoever she was. Sylvan had been deliberate about this, had made it a priority along the practical necessities, understanding that a child who grew up believing she was ordinary would move through the world with the unremarkable ease that was their best camouflage. Myra was not ordinary. This had become increasingly difficult to sustain as a working premise. The shift at age 5 had been the first significant breach in the camouflage. Sylvan had managed it, contained it, explained it to the one neighbor who had witnessed it as an early manifestation that would normalize with age, and relocate them to a different street within the month. The command gift emerging at 6 had been more complex. You could explain away an early shift. You could not easily explain why the wolves outside the cottage rearranged them into a protective formation in response to a sleeping child's murmured instruction. She had told her she had more time. She had told her this while increasing her exit rehearsals to nightly. The Easter egg was this. Every full moon, without variation or exception, a pack of wolves appeared at the edge of the field behind the cottage at dusk and arranged them into a perfect circle surround the building. Not threatening, not hunting, sitting in the specific posture of wolves who have received an instruction and are executing it with complete seriousness. They remained through the night without sound and were gone before Mira woke. Sylvan had documented this the first time with the careful objectivity of a trained practitioner who did not permit us the luxury interpretation before she had sufficient data. By the 6th occurrence, she had sufficient data, and her interpretation was this. Mira's command gift was operational in sleep, had been operational in sleep for longer than Sylvan had understood, and had been quietly organizing the local wolf population to protect her into a protective detail around their home for an unknown number of months. Her 6-year-old daughter had been running perimeter security on their cottage. Sylvan had told no one. She had added this information to the growing internal accounting of reasons why the timeline she had been working with had closed faster than she planned. The registration census had arrived the following week. She had taken it as the answer to a question she had been asking for 6 years. When, not whether, never whether. She had always known she would have to give Mira back to the world that belonged to her. She had simply been waiting for the moment when doing so on her own terms was still possible. That morning, she had retrieved the oilskin sleeve from behind the false panel for the last time. She had looked at Mira across the breakfast table, at the amber eyes and the black hair and the quality of self-possessed attention that had nothing to do with 6 years in a provincial cottage and everything to do with what ran in her blood. And she had said, with the steady voice she used for things that need to be said steadily, "Today we are going to tell someone important who you are." Mira had looked at her for a moment. "Did you already know who I was?" she asked. Sylvan said. From the first second, Mira had nodded with the gravity of a child filing important information correctly. "All right," she said, "I am ready." Aldrich Solmir did not conduct census visits personally. This was the established protocol, the understood division of administrative labor that had governed his territory's registration processes. Trained officials handled routine provincial enumeration, piled the records, flagged anomalies, trying through the appropriate channels, and presented summaries to the council in quarterly intervals. It was an efficient system. It was the correct use of available resources. He had personally overseen the last 3 provincial registrations. He had told his councils was because registration had produced discrepancies significant enough to suggest systemic problems chains in the overstand. This true. It was also not the complete truth. The complete truth was something he had not examined directly in 6 years, a quality of unresolved awareness that lived at the edge of his attention. It's the way a sound lived at the edge of hearing, present but not fully formed, impossible to conform, and equally impossible to dismiss entirely. He had been in the Drevet administered building, reviewing preliminary maintain Rent's signal when Drent's signal came. The signal was a specific knock sequence, 3 short, 1 long, 2 short, that indicated a registrating irregularity requiring immediate senior attention. Aldrich had established this system precisely because he understood that the category of irregularity warranting that sequence was narrow and specific, and not something that benefited from delay. He came through the door of the registration square without announcement. He saw the woman first. Dark hair tied low at the nape, grey-blue eyes that moved to him the moment he appeared with the specific quality of someone who had been tracking his approach. Before he was visible, not surveillance. Something older, the awareness of a person who had learned to know when something significant was entering their perimeter. She was standing at the registration table with one hand flat on a document and the particular stillness of someone who had made a decision and was on the other side of it. She was not afraid. That was the thing that registered before anything else. Not her face, not the document, not the way Drent had positioned him with his hand near his belt. The absence of fear in a woman standing at a royal registrant table on Saw, with an irregular document under her palm and the Arch-Chancellor's approach audible from the far end of the square. She was not afraid because she had already done the frightening part. Whatever this was, the moment of maximum risk had been the decision preceding it, and she had made that decision, and was now simply standing in its consequence with the composed readiness of someone who had rehearsed this exact position. Aldrich crossed the square. The bond hit him at approximately 8 feet. He had suppressed it for 6 years with disciplined consistency of a man's, who had been informed that the person the bond reached for was dead, and had decided that grief, properly managed, was preferable to the particular madness of mourning, something that was also still present at a biological level. He had suppressed it the way he suppressed everything that did not serve functionable's purpose. Thoroughly, systematically, without permitting suppressed examine what was being suppressed too closely. 6 feet. The suppression failed. Not incrementally, not with warning. The bond surfaced with 6 years of accumulated pressure in a single through his chest that moved through his chest like a structural event. The specific physical sensation, something load, berry giving way, a charge that traveled from his sternum outward and upward, and left him with the involuntary, slow stillness of a man whose entire operations had just received an input it was not architecturally prepared to process. His nostrils flared once. His left hand closed at his side. The woman's grey-blue eyes found his and held them with a steadiness that told him she had felt it too, felt it and was managing it. With the same iron discipline she was applying to everything else in this moment, pressing it down with visible effort and visible cost. "You kept the document," he said. "Not a question." "I kept both of them," she said. "I destroyed neither." He looked at the paper under her hand, at the archive seal, at the date, 6 years ago, written in a hand he did not know and simultaneously recognized as the hand that had written the death record he had read 6 years ago in a council chamber, while a senior physician explained the complications of a difficult birth, and Brennan Voss stood at the edge of the room with his hands folded and his expression calibrated to exactly the correct gradient of formal sympathy. He had known, in the specific wordless way of knowing that the mind to detect itself from by refusing to complete the thought that something was wrong. He had not looked. He understood now, with the comprehender and devastating clarity of a man receiving 6 years of suppressed information simultaneously, precisely what that failure had cost. He started to speak. Then he saw Mira. She had been standing at the woman's left side the entire time. He had registered her presence peripherally. A child, small, dark-haired, and had not looked directly because his attention had been entirely occupied by the woman and the document and the bond detonating in his chest. He looked now. The amber eyes looked back. His eyes, the specific shade and depth that the Solmir bloodline had produced for 4 generations, and that court genealogist had. Document as a dominant trait so thoroughly expressed that it could not be diluted below recognition in any direct descendant. His eyes, in a 6-year-old face, looking at him with the focus possess an entirely self-detention of someone conducting a thorough assessment and declining to be rushed through it. The assessment was familiar. He conducted it had conducted it since childhood, had been told by 3 different council members across his lifetime that habit of looking at people as though he was reading something they had not written for public consumption, was disconcerting and strategically inadvisable. His daughter had it at 6. Something moved through him that was not an emotion he had a word for, too large for grief, too specific for joy, occupying the space where both of them might have lived if they had been permitted to develop over 6 years, rather than arriving simultaneously in the space of 4 seconds. Mira tilted her head fractionally. "You have my eyes," she said, with the reasonable tone of someone observing something factually interesting. The corners of Aldrich's jaw tightened. "You have mine," he said. Mira considered this with the gravity it deserved. Then she looked at her mother. Then she looked back at Aldrich with the amber eyes that were his eyes and that carried at their edges. Faint, unmistakable to anyone who knew what they were looking for. The specific luminous quality of command gift coming into its power. A gift the Council's own records declared extinct. A gift that Brennan Voss had spent 20 years ensuring the court believed was extinct. Aldrich felt it like a second structural event, smaller than the bond, more precise. The recognition of a man who had grown up hearing about command gift in historical accounts and was now standing 3 feet from their person who carried it, understanding in a single moment exactly why someone had wanted her to be dead before she drew her first breath. He looked at Sylvan. She met his gaze with the gray-blue eyes that had been managing this knowledge alone for 6 years. She said nothing. She did not need to. The document under her hand said everything she had decided to say, and she had calculated correctly that it would be sufficient. From the far end of the square, Brennan Voss's footsteps reached the registration area. Voss entered the registry square the way he entered every room, with the unhurried authority of a man who had arranged the furniture of the world to his preferences over several decades, and had not yet encountered a configuration he could not adjust. He was wearing the Arch-Chancellor's blue. His white hair was immaculate. His expression carried the specific warmth of a man who had spent 60 years perfecting the performance of concern. His eyes moved across the square, who had been doing assessments for so long. It no doing threat assessment for so long. It's like accent. Drent, the document, Sylvan, then Mara. He stopped at Mira. The warmth in his expression did not disappear. It shifted, in the way, fractionally, in the way that things shifted when a variable appeared that required recalculation, without the recalculation being visible. His brown eyes rested on the amber ones for exactly 1 beat too long. Then he looked at Aldrich. "My Lord King," smooth, practiced, the voice of a man who had delivered difficult news so many times that the delivery had become the thing, not the news self. "I came as soon as Drent's signal reached me. I understand there has been a documentation irregularity." His gaze moved to Sylvan with the flat, categorizing attention of someone filing a subject under a known heading. "This woman has produced a valid Royal Archive document," Aldrich said. A pause perceptible, the pause of a man recalibrating. "The document's validity is precisely the concern," Voss said. "A Royal Archive birth record appearing 6 years after the corresponding death record suggests either a clerical error of significant magnitude, or..." He let the alternative remain unspoken, which was more effective than naming it. "Something requiring council review before any conclusions are drawn." "I have drawn my conclusions," Aldrich said. Voss looked at him for a moment, with the careful attention of a man who had managed this particular alpha for 11 years and was current, assessing whether the tools that had worked for 11 years were still operational. "My lord, the legal implications of..." "Drent," Aldrich's voice did not change volume. "Step away from the table." Drent did not move. This was the first wrong thing. Drent was a provincial registrar of mid-level rank, with no authority that superseded a direct instruction from the Alpha King. He had no institutional basis for remaining where he was. He remained there anyway, with the specific quality of stillness of someone who had received a different instruction from a different authority and had made his calculus about which one he was prepared to honor. Sylvan saw it. She saw Aldrich see it. She saw the moment Aldrich understood that Drent's loyalty had never been to the registration office. "Detain her," Voss said, quietly, almost gently, the tone of a man issuing a reasonable administrative instruction. Drent moved. He was across the table's distance in 3 strides, and the strength came from his belt in a single practice motion, silver threaded cord. The kind used for wolf suppression in formal custody situations, the kind that required advanced preparation because it was not standard registration equipment. He had brought it with him this morning. He had known, before Sylvan approached the table, that he might need it. The cord closed around Sylvan's wrists. She did not struggle. Known this was a possible outcome when she walked to the table, had desired, had made her peace with it, had decided that what she was setting in motion today was worth whatever it cost her personally. She held her wrists still and looked at Myra with the steady grey-blue eyes and said, quietly and completely, "It is all right. Stay where you are." Myra looked at her mother's bound wrists. She looked at Drent's hand on the cord. She looked at Voss. Then she spoke. Not loudly, not with the panic of a frightened child or the theatrics of a scene being performed. She spoke with the quiet, absolute bone, deep authority of something that had been present since before she had words for it. Something that lived in the frequency below conscious decision-making and had simply been waiting for the moment when it was needed. Let her go. 2 words. The registration square stopped. Not the people. The people did not choose to stop, which was the distinction that mattered. Every wolf in the square with enough blood to receive the frequency simply ceased. The 2 soldiers at the perimeter entrance froze, mid-step. Drent's hand on the cord went rigid, not from will, but from the complete and involuntary suspension of voluntary motor function. 3 members of the queuing public sat down simultaneously, their legs resolving a conflict their minds had not yet registered. The silver cord dropped from Drent's hand. Voss staggered, 1 step back. His face, for the first time in 60 years of political performance, showed something that had not been edited before it appeared. Not fear, but the specific expression of a man confronting a thing he had spent 20 years insisting did not exist. Command gift. Not the historical counts, not the archival descriptions. The real thing in a 6-year-old child filling the registry square with a frequency that was not sound and not force, but was experienced by every wolf present as both simultaneously. Aldrich felt it move through him. Not suppression, not resistance. The specific resonance of bloodline recognition. The Alpha King's own gift, responding to its direct descendants' first full expression the way a tuning fork responded to its frequency. He felt it in his chest, in his spine, in the marrow-level certainty of a man whose blood had just confirmed what his eyes had already told him. He understood in this moment everything. He understood why the council had needed the child to be dead before she drew breath. He understood why Voss had spent 20 years maintaining the fiction that commandance, a command, was distinct. Say understood that an alpha Heir carrying command gift could not be manipulated by a council that had built its entire infrastructure of influence on the manipulability of its kings. He understood that Voss had known from the moment the gift was detectable in the pregnancy, had known and had acted. Aldrich released his alpha aura. Full release, complete, no measurement, no calibration, no tactical deployment of graduated pressure. Everything. The air pressure in the registration square changed as if the sky had moved closer, dense, comprehensive. The specific atmospheric weight of the most dominant alpha in Solmir territory releasing 6 years of compressed suppression in a single, unmanaged instant. 6 years of grief as function of deliberate not knowing of a suspicion he had never permitted him to complete. Drent went down first. Both knees involuntary, the expression of a man whose body had made a decision well ahead of his mind. The 2 perimetals followed within seconds, Not thrown, not struck, simply unable to resolve the conflict between their training and the fundamental biological reality that their nervous systems were current receiving. Short now, explosive. No space between moments. The third soldier reached for his weapon. Aldrich crossed the distance in 2 strides, and the weapon was no longer in play. One motion, total, the economy of a man for whom this had long since become reflex rather than effort. The soldier sat down with the expression of someone who had received a comprehensive message and intended to honor it completely. The fourth came from the left. He did not finish coming. The collision was brief and absolute, and the fourth soldier met the registration table's edge and stayed in its vicinity, say for the foreseeable future. Voss had not moved. He stood in the center of the record with his white hair still immaculate, and his chancellor's blue still perfectly arranged, and his expression doing something it had not done in 60 years of political performance, failing to perform. Beneath it was a face had never seen immediately recognize. The face of a man who had built an architecture of Lewin so comprehensive that he had stopped being able to distinguish between the structure and him, and was now watching the structure come down. And Aldrich walked toward him, unhurried, through the settled dust and the kneeling soldiers and the absolute stillness of a square in which every wolf had received the full weight of both the Alpha King's aura and his heir's command gifts simultaneously, and had not a single motor resource left over for anything else. He stopped in front of Voss. He looked at him for a long moment with the amber eyes that his daughter had inherited and that carried. In this moment, none of the administrative patience he had been extending to this man for 11 years. "How long," he said, "did you know she was alive?" Voss held his gaze. The performance was gone. What remained underneath it was neither contrition nor defiance. It was the specific, contained quality of a man who had always known this. Day existed somewhere in the probability distribution of his choices and had simply placed it far enough out that it had stopped feeling real. From the beginning, Voss said, "One beat. She was not supposed to survive the relocation," he said. "The woman I sent to ensure it." He stopped. Something moved across his face that was not guilt, and was adjacent to it. She made a different choice. Aldrich looked at him. "The woman you sent," he said quietly, "is Mira's mother." Voss said nothing. That silence was its own complete answer. Aldrich reached into his coat. The Alpha Seal, black metal, thumb-worn, the instrument that superseded every council authorizations in the territory with immediate and irrevocable effect. "Arch-Chancellor Brennan Voss," he said, in the flat declarative register of a man reading from a decision already made, "you are under arrest for conspiracy against the royal succession, falsification of royal birth documentation, and authorizations of an action the Reknad Heir to the Sommer's seat." And he held Voss's gaze without inflection. Silver restraints, full suppression grade, council detention, not your own facility. He put the seal away. He looked at Mira. She was standing exactly where she had been standing since she spoke, still, self-possessed, her amber eyes moving between her mother and her father and their settled wreckage of the registration square, with the focused calm of a child processing a great deal of new information and declining to be overwhelmed by any of it. She met his gaze. She did not smile. She did not reach for him. She regarded him with the measured, unhurried attention she applied to everything that mattered, the same quality of assessment he conducted him, the same instinct for taking the full measure of a thing before committing to a response. He had been assessed by allies and enemies for 31 years. He had never once felt assessed by someone he needed to deserve. "Is my mother all right?" Mira asked. He looked at Sylvan, at the marks on her wrists from the cord, at the steady gray-blue eyes watch him with done readiness of a woman who had done what she came to, and was now waiting to see what it had cost. "Yes," said, "she is." Mira nodded, filed it correctly. "All right," she said. The registration square settled in the particular quiet of aftermath. Soldiers on the ground in various states of voluntary and involuntary stillness. Voss standing in silver restraints with his chancellor's blue finally, looking like what it was. A costume rather than an identity, the garment of a performance that had concluded. Drent seated on the ground with the expression of a man who had made a calculations this morning and was now conducting a thorough post-mortem of that calculations methodology. The public had retreated to the square's perimeter with the collective, unspoken agreement of people who understood that they had witnessed something significant and were processing it at whatever pace their individual systems permitted. Aldrich issued the custody's instructions in the flat, precise register of a man for whom this category of action had become administrative rather than emotional. Voss to the Crown. Detention facility under garrison escort. Drent to the provincial holding house pending full interrogation. The perimeter soldiers to their commanding officer's authority pending individual review of their role in this morning's operation. He watched them go. Then the square was quiet. Sylvan had not moved from the position she had occupied since the cord fell from Drent's hand. She was standing at the registry table with her wrists at her sides. The marks from the silver cord reddened against her skin in the thin lattice pattern of suppression, grade contact. And she was looking at nothing in particular with the grey-blue eyes of a woman who had just reached the end of a very long road and had not yet determined what the terrain looked like on the other side of it. Mira stood at her left side, not pressing against her, not clinging, simply present in the particular way Mira was present for things that mattered, with both feet planted and her amber eyes, moving between her mother and her father with the patient assessment of a child who had desired the adults needed a moment and was prepared to allow them several. Aldrich looked at Sylvan's wrists. He looked at the marks. He looked at her face, at the 6 years written into it, at the composed readiness that had not broken through any of this morning's events, at the particular quality of stillness that he was beginning to understand was not the absence of feeling, but the complete and practiced management of it. The architecture of a woman who had learned to function at full capacity, regardless of what was happening underneath. He crossed the square. He removed the physician-medic satchel without asking. The medic, to his credit, offered with being asked, and he applied the silver burn salve to Sylvan's wrists with the careful attention of a man who understood that this was not sufficient and was doing it anyway because insufficient gestures were still gestures, and she had been doing everything alone for 6 years. She let him. She did not pull away, did not make it easier by filling the silence with words. She held still with the professional composure of a midwife accustomed to managing her own physical discomfort without burdening the people around her with it, and she watched his hands on her wrists with an expression he could not fully read, and did not try to interpret what he was doing. He finished. He did not step back. He went to his knees. Not a stumble, not exhaustion, not the performance of a man calculating the optics of a public gesture. Both knees on the stone of the registration square, the full weight of the Alpha King of Solmere arranged into an act that had nothing to do with his title and everything to do with the specific debt that could not be paid in any currency except the acknowledgement of its size. He did not reach for her hands. He looked up at her face from the ground with the amber eyes that their daughter had inherited and that carried, in this moment, none of the governance they usually held, just the unmanaged reality of a man who had received 6 years of information in a single morning and was done pretending any of it had a comfortable shape. "I am not apologizing for today," he said. His voice was stripped of the command register entirely, not broken. Simply honest in the way that things came on it when there was nothing left to perform. Today is the part I can account for. Today I was here. Today, when it mattered, I was in this square. He paused. "I am apologizing for the question I did not finish asking 6 years ago." The jaw tightened once, the single visible tell of a man exerting significant control over a significant amount of feeling. "I am apologizing for the suspicion I filed and did not act on, for the death record I read in a council chamber with Voss standing at the edge of the room, and something in me that knew the geometry of the room was wrong, that knew the explanation was too complete, that knew." He stopped, exhaled. "Because looking would require, I had to believe I had been deceived by someone I had governed alongside for 11 years, and I preferred the alternative." He held her gaze. "You did not have that preference available to you. You had a child to protect and a council that had already demonstrated its intentions, and 6 years of complete solitude in which to manage both, and you managed both." Something moved through his expression that was not emotion designed for observation. "I did not make that possible. You are entirely without me. Square was very quiet. Sylvan's eyes were bright. She had not cried in 6 years. She had made this a policy with the same grim precisions she applied to every variable that threatened her function stability. Crying required a safety she had not possessed, required the luxury of allowing the structure to relax, and she had not been able to afford the structure relaxing for a single morning in 6 years. She could not afford it now precisely. Voss was in custody but not yet tried. The territory's political landscape had just been restructured in the space of an hour, and the structuring had not yet settled into a form whose stability she could assess. There were 100 variables still in motion. She was crying anyway. Not with the collapse whose strucks of somewhere. Simply the quiet, involuntary release of a woman whose body had decided, without salting her, that 6 years was long enough, and this particular moment was the one it had been saving the release for. She let it happen just this once, just here. Mara stepped forward. She walked to Aldrich, still kneeling, still looking up at Sylvan, and stood in front of him with the same planted, self-possessed stance she had used at the registration table. She looked at him with the amber eyes that were his eyes, and the expression of a child who had been watching adult proceeding with full attention and had arrived at a conclusion. She placed small hands on his shoulders. Not a hug. The deliberate, considered placement of a child making a decision with her body, while her words assembled them. The gesture of someone who had determined that the man in front of her had said the true thing, and that the true thing, in Mira's value system, was the beginning of something rather than the resolution of it. Aldrich went absolute still. The kind of still that was not discipline, the kind that happened when the thing you had not known you were waiting for arrived, and the body needed a moment to understand that it had received it. He looked at his daughter's hands on his shoulders. He looked at her face. "You said the true thing," Mira said, with the matter of fact authority of a 6-year-old delivering a verdict she had considered carefully and stood behind completely. He held her gaze. "I tried to," he said. Mira nodded, satisfied with this answer, which was a more honest answer than claiming success. She turned and pressed hers against her mother's side. Sylvan's hand came to rest on her daughter's dark hair, automatic, practiced, the motion of 6 years of being the only person in the world Mira had. Aldrich rose from his knees. He stood in the settling quiet of the registry square and looked at the two of them, the woman who had protected his daughter with the only tools available to her, and the daughter who had inherited the best of both of them, and said nothing because there was nothing available that was not inadequate. And he had learned this mornings were worse than honest silence. He would find the words. He had time now. That was what today had given him. Time. They did not leave Dreveth that day. Aldrich made this decision within the first hour in the quiet manner of a man who has understood what the next several hours require, and has no remaining investment in any schedule that predates this morning. The garrison soldiers secured the provincial administrative building. Drent was transferred. The square was cleared of its remaining audience, with the efficient, unhurried management of people who had received clear instructions and understood their purpose. Sylvan's wrists were treated properly by the garrison physician. A thorough application, not the field dressing, Aldrich had applied in the square, which he acknowledged without being told was insufficient by handing her over twos and some with the corrects to splies and stanchions aside without making the handover about him. She noted this. It was a small thing. Small things were how she had learned to read people accurately across a career of being in rooms where the performance was designed to obscure the person. Mira sat on the physician's table beside her mother and provide a detailed and largely accurate count of her own medical history, to anyone who appeared professional interest in receiving it. The formal recognition took place in Dreveth's provincial hall as the afternoon light came through the high windows and lay in long pale bars across the stone floor. Aldrich stood without ceremony and read from documents his traveling secretary had prepared in the 2 hours between the registration square and this room. Documents drafted with the speed of someone who understood that the leading architecture needed to be in place before they ended. Because every hour that Mara's exist without formal recognition was an hour in which the council's remaining members could construct a competing narrative. Mira Solmir, first of her name, recognized heir to the Solmir Alpha seat and sole succession holder of record. Her birth formally entered into the royal registry with immediate retroactive effect. The corresponding false death record struck from the archive and transferred to the evidentiary record for Voss's tribunal. Her command gift document as confirmation of direct bloodline inheritance, not extinct, not historical, present and operational, and belonging to the living heir of the Solmir line. Every decree issued on the basis of the false death record to be reviewed, suspended pending review, and reissue where valid under the correct succession record. Then, the second document, Sylvan Kale Solmir, recognized Luna of the Solmir Pack, her bond to the Alpha King formally acknowledged under ancient Pack law, its 6-year suppression noted in the official record, not as an administrative gap, but as the documented consequence of a council conspiracy now subject to full tribunal proceedings. Her professional record as royal midwife, restored without qualification. Her conduct in the protection of the recognized heir, noted explicitly in the formal recognition document, as the action of a person who had prioritized the succession's integrity over her own safety for 6 years. He had insisted on that last clause His secretary had asked if it was legally necessary. He had said it was not legally necessary. It was accurate. The distinction mattered to him. The people of Dreveth were not overlooked. The town had sheltered Sylvan and Mira for 3 of their 6 years without knowing what they were sheltering, had accepted a midwife who asked no questions about their histories and expected none about her own, had allowed a dark-haired child with unusual eyes to grow up in their streets without making her unusual eyes into a subject of public discussion. This was not nothing. Aldrich understood this in the specific way of a man who had spent 11 years watching Voss manage what information reached which people, and who understood that community that protected what they did not fully understand were community that operated on a form of trust that was rarer and more valuable than the kind that required complete information. The town received formal crown protection, not absorption into the pack registry, which Aldrich understood without being told would not be the appropriate gesture for a community that had survived precisely by remaining outside formal structures, but the specific designation of a protected settlement, a protecton under direct royal acknowledgement. The provincial physician who had treated Mira's early shifts without reporting them received a letter of commendation that did not specify what he was being commended for, but that carried enough weight to be useful for the rest of his professional life. At dusk, Mira stood at window of the provincial hall's upper room and watched the last light leave the sky over there. Western fields with the patient, appreciative attention of a child who had decided this was worth observing completely. Aldrich stood beside her. They had been finding, across the afternoon, that they were comfortable in the same silence, the specific silence of people who processed the world by watching it rather than filling it with sound, who found the presence of another watcher companionum rather than demanding. The wolves that came on full moons, Mira said. I told them to. I know, Aldrich said. I did not know I was telling them. The gift works before the understanding does, he said. That is how it begins. Mira considered this. Will you teach me the rest? He looked at his daughter, at the amber eyes watching the darkening fields, at the black hair and the quality of self-possessed attention that was entirely her own, entirely his, and entirely her mother's all at once. Yes, everything I know. Mira nodded. Satisfied, she slipped in with the simple, declarative ease of a child who had made her decision and saw no reason to complicate it further. They stood together until Sylvan came to find them, and then the three of them walked down from the window into the warmth of the hall below, into the ordinary extraordinary fact of an evening that belonged to all of them. Arch-Chancellor Brennan Voss is in custody tonight. His tribunal convenes the fortnight, and the charge will take part 30 years of constructed influence in oaken proceeding that the council cannot manage or contain. But here is the question I cannot stop turning over. Voss told Aldrich that the woman he sent to ensure Sylvan did not survive the relocation, made a different choice. He said it with something that was not guilt and lived next. That means someone chose Sylvan's life over Voss's instructions. Someone who worked for him close enough to be trusted with that assignment. Someone who has been living with that choice for 6 years, while Voss believed the job was done. Who was she? Is she still in the capital? Does she know what Sylvan built with the life she protected? Tell me in the comments. I want your theories. If this story found you tonight, like this video. Share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to someone who never swiped, so you never miss what's next. The woman who made the different choice is still out there, and her story is just beginning.